Yes, in this video we'll be talking about proportion. So what is proportion? Proportion is a measure of changes in value. Changes in value, like when one value goes up, the other is expected to come down. When one comes down, the other is expected to go up. So proportion is a measure of changes in value. For example, if we say that a cow costs 2 million naira was the cost of 10 cows, so that means we are going to do a little bit of multiplication there. So that's just proportion. So now let's look at the types of proportion. There are basically two types of proportion. We have the direct proportion and the indirect proportion proportion. So what are the things that are done under both of them? So in every direct proportion, when one value, let's say value 1, variable 1, when one variable goes up, so let's call it variable 1, when it goes up, the other variable is expected to go up as well. So that means the variables are expected to go up, or they're expected to come down. So that means when one variable goes up, the other is expected to go up, or when one variable comes down, the other is expected to come down. In the case of direct proportion, I'm going to give us the action point to apply when we're doing that. So and for indirect proportion, when one variable, so for example, when a variable 1 goes up, the variable 2 is expected to come down. So that means when one value goes up, the other is expected to come down, or when one value comes down, the other is expected to go up. So that is in the case of indirect proportion. Another name for indirect proportion is inverse proportion. Inverse, which means the opposite. So they go opposite directions. So for direct proportion, most time we have to, the action points on every direct proportion, the action points that we need to note on every direct proportion is that we mostly divide first, then we multiply next, and in some cases it may be ordinary division, or we have it as ordinary multiplication. So when you do, like for example, if we have it like 10 mangoes cost $20, what's the cost of a mangoes? So that's going to be 20 divided by 10, and that gives you $2. So that means a mango costs $2 each. So that's just an example. So in some cases we just do division, or we have a question like if an orange is 4 naira, was the cost of 10 oranges. So that's just going to be 10 times 4. So in lower key stage 2, we have some proportions that are just plain multiplication and plain division. So but in higher key stages, we have them as you have to do both division and multiplication to get your answer. So and for indirect proportion, what are the action points? The action points in indirect proportion. So for indirect proportion, most times you multiply first and you divide next. You multiply first and you divide next. And in some cases, you may need to just do double division. And in some cases, you may just divide alone. So for indirect proportion, you may divide alone. So this is common for indirect proportion, and this is, yes, a little bit common. So but for indirect proportion, you also need to know what they are centered on. So indirect proportion is mostly centered on work or getting job done, work or labor. It centers on labor, so, or getting job done. So anything that has to do with job. So like we may say that 5 workers can build a house in so days, and how many workers or laborers will be needed to get the same job done in a particular day or something. So that's indirect proportion. But for direct proportion is based on goods, mostly talks about goods or commodity. So it mostly talks about commodities, that's goods or commodity, not actually services. When it comes to services, then that is indirect proportion. That's indirect proportion. So I'm going to solve some questions on direct proportion and some questions on indirect proportion. So try to get this recorded in your brain. So how do you know if direct proportion is a type of proportion in which one variable goes up, the other is expected to go up, or when one variable comes down, the other is expected to go the same direction. So the actual point for direct proportion is that you mostly divide first and you multiply next. So, and in some cases you may need to do just division, and in some cases you may need to do just multiplication. So, but for indirect proportion, it is a type of proportion in which as a variable goes up, the other is expected to come down, or as one variable comes down, the other is expected to go up. That is, as one value goes up, the other is expected to go the opposite direction. So that's why they are indirect or inverse. So the action point is that you multiply first, then you divide next, or you may do double division, or you may do only division alone. So this is a common action point. And do not forget that indirect proportion is based on labor or job getting work done, while direct proportion is based on goods or commodity. So thank you for watching. Please subscribe and watch more videos on direct proportion and indirect proportion where we solve practical questions. Thank you.